Hey everybody, this is Derwin from the Derwin Lester Show, and with me today is my old friend, the Rocket Man himself, Nick Oakes. Nick, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Derwin. I'm always glad to be here.
And today I want to go deep into our mutual love of military science fiction. Let's start with you. Where did you first get inspired by it?
Well, I think for me, it was. I'm tempted to say it was twofold, but really it was only one thing, and that is aliens. For most people who've been alive in the last 30, I guess it's 36 years now, it starts with aliens. Because when I was a little kid, I say little, I was probably little is relative. I was probably like 10.
That's little.
Probably maybe a little younger, maybe a little too young to be watching Alien, but I digress. But I saw Alien, and then I was like, well, I saw Alien, I need to watch Aliens. And
Obviously,
when you are inculcated into the cult of the colonial marines, you just never look back.
exactly.
You take that first trip out on the Sulaco, you never look back.
So it was the talk to me about the colonial marines. What was, because I've read a lot of your work, and there's a lot of aliens in there. There's a lot of Starship Troopers in there. Like we've talked several times about how it's pretty obvious that you and I have a lot of the same touchstones for pop culture and literature and things.
Yep.
So I'm noticing your work, there's a lot of like colonial marines in there. Talk to me about that. What in Aliens glommed on you with colonial marines?
Well, when it comes down to it, it's something and it's something I was talking with a friend of mine last night, actually. And to explain this, I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent. So bear with me. Bear with me.
Podcast is a great place to do that.
Yeah, for sure. But it's like I'm watching a show with my dad. It's been on. It's a Canadian show about it's like a detective show, but it's been on the air for like 13 years. Still, it's apparently started airing in like 2008 or 9, and it's still on the air.
Nice.
And the reason I think anyway, the reason it still sticks around and sticks in people's heads isn't necessarily because of the plot line. Because the show like that, the plot line can come or go. It's an episodic show. It's basically a case of the week show. But you stick around. You stick around for the characters. You stick around for the work that the actors and the showrunners and the writers put in to make the characters seem like real people. So that, in a way, is what gets you engrossed in, say, a Colonial Marine story or a Starship Trooper story. Yeah, of course, the story of fighting the bugs or fighting the xenomorphs or fighting the 10-foot-tall 3-armed reptiloids from Mars or whatever is interesting. But you stick around because the characters that are doing that fighting, doing that warring, are interesting and engaging. You feel like, oh, I could be one of them, or oh, I could have a beer with one of them. They feel like somebody you could either if you're a veteran, they feel like someone you might have known while you were in the service. If you're a civilian, they feel like someone you might have known who was in the service. They feel like people that are real.
We'll move into Starship Troopers because I literally just finished that like 10 minutes ago before we got on this call. And I remember watching this, and the girl, not Diz, the one who becomes a pilot, Carmen, yeah. Oh man, I was once very infatuated with a Carmen type. The type was familiar. I'm like, oh no, I hate you. Just bringing back terrible memories from my early 20s. I'm like, oh, I did that once. And when Carmen is with Rico in the beginning, and then she meets this other guy in training, and then she goes, oh, I like you now. And then Rico is like, hey man, what the fuck? And then they're fist fighting in the promenade. And I'm like, oh, I remember this. I saw 8 versions of this. And that's not to say anyone's, I'm not saying casting stones or judgment or anything. It's more like, oh, this is pretty spot on realistic.
Yeah.
You could die tomorrow, so you kind of want a little bit of physical comfort that's nearby. And
well, you hit the nail on the head. Even speaking as someone who wasn't obviously in that world, in that environment at any point in my life,
yeah,
you take a bunch of early 20-something men and women, obviously in the case of Starship Troopers, and of course, women in the real world military, more so obviously today than that war when Heinlein wrote the original book. Even you take that sort of sexually charged atmosphere that already exists for people of that age, and then you make them all constantly around each other, constantly, filling their heads with bravado and everything. It's very, it's like you said, it's very testosterone fueled. There's lots of that. There's lots of free roaming energy and stuff.
We did not have co-ed showers, because that's just like asking for trouble. We had co-ed bathrooms at times, but not showers. And I don't know, at a certain point you're just like, well, that's just Sarah. Sarah's not any particular person. But yeah, Starship Troopers, and to go deeper into Starship Troopers, which is great, there's that lovely element of satire. It's the most, sort of glossy, fantastically fascist world, right? It's gleefully fascist. It's so much fun, and everyone's dying horrible deaths.
Yeah,
but it's really brightly colored, right? Except for the Nazi uniforms.
It rewards multiple reviewings, because there's stuff you pick apart that, like, full disclosure, I watch a lot of movie reactors, like people who watch movies like professionally, basically, like watch a movie and then like comment on it as they're watching, because I had nothing better to do with my life. Really. I obviously have plenty good to do with my life, but like when I watch YouTube, a lot of times I watch reactors, because it's a way to basically watch a movie that you've seen 1,000 times anew, because it's like watching it with a friend who's never seen it, because you get to know these people, obviously. But my point is, in watching Starship Troopers, a lot of times you realize things, and like especially they point things out. Like, you ever notice how at the start of the movie, the propaganda showing the arachnid soldier bug eating the cow's death is censored, but then it immediately smash cuts to the Mormon colony on whatever bumfuck planet it is that was attacked, and those people are laying there with their brains hanging out uncensored, because they deserve to die, so why do we care what it looks like when they're dead? You gotta get inside the mentality of this world. You gotta realize that it's one of those things where you can't show a cow being mutilated, but we can show execution on the nightly TV for pay-per-view.
Mandatory viewing at 6 o'clock. It said, would you like to know more? Sure, that'd be great. There was the way that the teacher in the early parts of the movie, the guy who's missing a hand, when Rico is like, sir, should I join? What should I do? The teacher is giving very measured responses, right? Because the service took his hand, but also they live in Nazi Germany, even though everyone's just, hot and 25 and rich and whatever. They live in Nazi Germany, so he kind of has to watch his P's and Q's.
Well, and again, this is something I can offer as far as this discussion goes. I just, in the interest of having this chat, I watched. I can't remember the guy's name. I could look up his video and link it to you if you wanted to mention it in your comments for this episode or something. There's a gentleman on YouTube who does a channel where he does things called like retrospective and review or something like that. And he did one for all three of Paul Verhoeven's like trilogy of sci-fi satire movies. Starting with RoboCop, then Total Recall, then Starship Troopers. And he points out that when Paul Verhoeven was originally tapped to direct Starship Troopers, he envisioned it pretty much specifically as a satire of fascist society based on his own experience living in Nazi-occupied Holland.
Oh,
And
shit. He lived in that?
yeah. Paul Verhoeven lived in Nazi-occupied Holland during World War II. And he specifically based his idea of this, because the original script wasn't as much of a satire as much as it was kind of a straight, like, oh, this is gung-ho, we're going to do this and that.
Yeah.
Well, he said, no, I'm going to take this and make it a critique of that type of life and that type of mindset. And obviously, it's like, you know, again, I made a comment on one of those reaction videos that I watched where someone had commented, Carl's uniform looks kind of like an SS uniform, doesn't it? And I said, yeah, that's not my mistake. That's on purpose. There's a reason for that.
Yeah. And, you know, and sometimes they really shine a light on it where you've got the guy at the desk at the in processing center. He's like, the mobile infantry made me into the man I am today. He's just like 3/8 of a guy or something, right? He's just
one arm. He's two arms. Yeah, he's got like two arms, one of which is, I think one of which is robotic, and he's got no legs.
Yeah. And, you know, but then you've got that professor teacher guy who's kind of, because I'm watching this, I'm trying to see like, oh, is he trying to nudge him toward it or against it? And he's kind of, you know, that classic response where someone says, what should I do? You say, well, what do you think you should do? So that way, if you say some stuff that's against the body politic, my name's Paul and this is between y'all, you know?
Yeah.
And you talk, I'm thinking.
No, you're fine. Yeah, I mean, again, going back to the whole Paul Verhoeven connection, Paul Verhoeven specifically cast, I don't know about all of them, but I mean, it mentioned in that video again that he wanted Casper Van Dien because he thought he looked like the perfect, like, Aryan Superman to be playing this role.
Oh my God.
Which is, again,
handsome, symmetrical face.
It's ironic that they live in Argentina.
Not a lot of Hispanic people in Buenos Aires.
Well, the thing is, if you've never heard, I'll explain the reference this way by telling a joke. There's three. You should never ask a man what he makes, a woman her age, or an Argentinian what division in the SS his abuelo served in.
I never heard that. Oh man, I'm currently rediscovering Starship Troopers myself.
Yeah.
And I never not stopped loving the movie, but like I thought I had it, and then I looked through my DVDs and I couldn't find it. So I'm like, oh, I'll just rent it off Amazon. And I'm like, oh, there's like 3 of them. And then there's cartoons.
Yeah.
And I need to dig more deeper into that fantastic, gleefully fascist well. But so moving on from that, I think I would say if there's a military sci-fi movie I love the most, it's Starship Troopers. And that's the Ur-Text.
You know, it's funny that Starship Troopers, the movie, didn't come out until 1997 because the original novel, well, obviously very different from the movie and like notably different. Like everyone who points out, you know, everyone who ever, like any analyst who ever talks about the movie and the book in relation to each other, really only ever talks about how different they are from each other. But the text is the Ur-Text. You know, it's the source text for military sci-fi, basically. You know, there was other stuff that came before it, but when that came out, and I want to say like late 50s, I think maybe 59. You know, that again, that's. I've seen people talk extensively in forums or on, you know, analysis videos, whatever, about how you know, Aliens basically is unconsciously, if not directly consciously, responding to and sort of being influenced by Starship Troopers, and then everything that came after Aliens is being influenced by both of them. There's another one. Obviously, we're not really talking about books as much, but tonight. But you know, if you've never read the Forever War, please read the Forever War.
Talk to me about the Forever War.
The Forever War is basically the Forever War is here. I know you'll get this reference. You remember Dr. Schick, the film professor that you didn't like, that we had. Well, my capstone class was with her, and
Yeah.
it was a war in cinema. And in that class, she taught two films back to back. She taught John Wayne's The Green Berets, and she taught Full Metal Jacket. And she taught them as a sort of dichotomy in how the Vietnam War was approached during the war and then after the war when it had been critically reappraised by the American public. And obviously, you probably get the inference there without me having to go too much into detail. But basically, the Forever War is to military science fiction as the Full Metal Jacket is to the Vietnam War, because the guy who wrote yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, from what I remember with the Forever War, he's a Vietnam vet, and
yes, he is.
He didn't want to write a propaganda piece.
Yeah,
he wanted to actually say, "Hey, this is what war is. It's not glorious. People die for no reason, and it's a bummer."
Yeah,
and
that's exactly what it is. I was enthralled when I read that book, but it's a hard read, because basically he and his, like, the books, just to give a little bit of background for those of your viewers, listeners, whoever who aren't aware of the story. It starts off in the future. Obviously, it's in our past already from modern perspective, but it starts off in the future from when it was written, and the main character and a bunch of other young smart people are drafted into the United Nations Defense Force to go fight these aliens that have supposedly been attacking human ships off the frontiers of space. And, they go through a training that's so brutal that people are dying in training. They get sent off to fight, and they're like, they're slaughtering these aliens like in their villages, with like post-hypnotic suggestion induced like killing rampages. And then they get involved in like these space battles where people are dying in their crash couches because of the G forces, and they're powerless to do anything to protect themselves. And then the cherry on top, the thing that really is that for a lot of people, and me included, is really the kicker of the story. It's not necessarily even about the war as much as it is the alienation they felt when they got home, because
the world had passed them by.
Yes, because of time dilation, because the fact that to get to the places where they're actually going to fight, they have to go near light speed, which means that time is passing slower for them, relatively speaking, than it is for the rest of the world. So when Mandela, that's the character's name, it's his last name, I can't remember his first name, William Mandela, I think, when he gets back to Earth, it's like 50 years in the future, and human society has changed just enough that he no longer fits in. And he's like, well, what am I supposed to do now? So he just basically re-enlists and goes off to fight again. When he comes back, it's like 100 years in the future. And it's basically, the further he gets into the war, the further and further he gets from home. And it's that story of not just the alienation of actually doing the fighting, but the alienation of coming home and trying to readjust to a society that has left you behind.
And at the end of it, the humans have evolved so much that they're essentially analogous with the enemy, right?
Yeah. I think that's the big twist at the end, is that it's sort of, it's never really said explicitly, at least not in that novel, because I know there are sequels, but it's kind of implied that basically the reason the war ended is because humans evolved enough that we were finally able to communicate with the aliens, and we realized the whole thing was just a misunderstanding.
Yeah, and then there's a colony set aside for the soldiers that had been living through a time dilated experience. I can 100% relate there. I often felt like I was put into I stepped out of the universe in 2006, and then I get off active duty in 2011, and I'm like, oh, what?
Yeah.
What's happening?
Like you just said, you basically stepped out of the world for 5 years. That's really the closest going on active duty and for 5 years and then coming back and trying to readjust is basically the closest you can get to a William Mandela experience in the real world.
It was a YouTube comment section, but there was an interesting discussion on it that I was a part of recently, where a lot of people the vast, vast, vast majority of veterans assimilate back into society to a certain degree. You know, in that they have families, they have jobs, they have housing, right? They hit the basics. And the vast majority, at the very least, clear that bar. There is a small fraction, a fraction of a fraction that don't. And you have to, when you go to basic training, you have to like do a hard reset on who you are as a person. And then you're a part of a collective, right? What they don't tell you is that the military is a super collectivist socialist organization, right? Because when people talk about socialism, I'm like, oh, I did that once for like 13 years. It was, you know, varying degrees, but and those people, when they get out, sometimes the readjusting doesn't really work. They can't quite hold down a job because of the things they had to do, the person they had to become, the sort of like continuous fight or flight response that was nonstop, where if you failed, people died, right? All that fucking pressure that's on your shoulders. And it just, you're like, oh, but this was the world. And then you get to this whole other place and they're like, why are you so upset? Why are you so tense? What's wrong? And then, you know, those people join extremist movements like the Proud Boys, like the people that put on the horns and charge at the Capitol, right? Mm-hmm. You know, I try not to get super political with this platform, but domestic terrorism is bad.
Yeah.
I feel pretty safe saying if domestic violence used to promote your political beliefs against civilians and United States political officials is domestic terrorism, which is bad. And the question was, why don't people assimilate there? And then you kind of touch on that a little bit, where the whole world passes you by, you know. And anyway, you good?
Yeah, sorry, I was just calling my dog.
Got it. Okay.
My dad just let him out of his bedroom and he's sniffing around. And I don't want him to get in trouble.
But I can see where Mandela could be a symptom of that, where a lot of veterans who came back from Vietnam or the Forever War, you know, they're like, oh, the world's so different and I don't know how to be a person again. Also, you know, I cry randomly in the shower sometimes.
Yeah.
You know.
And you know, it's, and I'm thinking here, obviously, again, can't speak to this experience myself. I've never even been outside the country, let alone having been to Afghanistan or someplace like that, especially now on military duty. But I imagine we're going to have some, in a weird sort of horribly morbid way. I'm kind of interested to see what sort of science, like what sort of military science fiction comes out of the Afghanistan generation. Because, you know, we basically had Vietnam, but longer. You know, we had 20 years of people in the mountains and in the deserts of Afghanistan that turned out really to be for nothing. And now they're kind of just wondering, what did all that mean? And it's basically, like I said, it's basically Vietnam 2.0.
Yeah, that's the hard part. And I would say the meaning is dependent on the person.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I would only suggest that maybe it meant something.
Yeah. Oh, I'm not saying it. Yeah.
And you're fine.
Not trying to put words in anyone's mouth.
No, you're fine. You're fine. Just I'm an Iraq vet, but there is a piece of meaning there. We had our miracle at Dunkirk. You know, we evacuated 100,000 refugees out. Some live in my neighborhood. You know, they're very nice in that they ignore me and I ignore them, and life is good. You know, that's the beauty of my neighborhood, my little corner. It's a, you know, there's a bunch of different types of people. Everyone ignores each other. It's awesome.
The American dream.
It's the American dream. You buy
ignore a house and be ignored by decent people who just live in their lives.
Yeah, it's kind of that's the social contract. I'll ignore you if you ignore me, and we'll return each other's mail when it's delivered improperly. But no, I can see where a lot of people would feel sad. I've talked to Afghan vets about that, and some of them kind of made peace with that war a long time ago. Some, some never will. And that kind of goes back to people failing to assimilate a little bit. And I think that is an interesting vein to mine. But also, that's not really a military science fiction vein. That's more of that's closer to Rambo, right? I never
The
actually
original Rambo.
I never saw First Blood. I've only seen Rambo 4.
You never seen First Blood?
I have never seen First Blood. I've only seen
You
the
should
fourth.
watch that. First Blood. That people, again, I watch reaction videos. There's like compilations of people watching like the final 5 minutes of First Blood, or Rambo, which a lot of people call Stallone's five greatest minutes of acting. Like where he goes on a tirade about how coming back from the war basically left him a broken man, and he says something to the effect of what's the line? Over there I was in charge of $1 million equipment. Over here I can't even get a job parking cars.
Yeah. I remember being I remember being Doc, and being the guy that people came to with their problems, and having late nights with captains and first sergeants and stuff, and going over people and their problems and who's doing well in the platoon and whatever. And like with Rambo, you get out, you're like, oh, I'm fuck. I remember going from that to being an unarmed security guard at a call center, and it was jet lag, man. It really was. Okay, so back
to more mainstream military sci-fi, away from maybe the more melancholy, cerebral military sci-fi that deals with the afterwards.
That's actually where most of my passion is, or I don't know. I always loved military science fiction. I grew up on it. I was raised on it. There was like your book you're talking about. There was a quadrilogy that John Ringo wrote called The Posling Cycle. And in this, aliens, kind of like the bugs in Starship Troopers, land on Earth in like the early 2000s. And, they're kind of like feral lizards, and it's the humans adapting with alien technology to fight them, right? It's a wonderful operatic story. The sorts of stories that always grip me the most are kind of melancholic, sad science fiction, military science fiction stuff, right?
Yeah.
But I know for me, Battlestar Galactica was probably my favorite example of military science fiction on a TV show, right? I love Star Trek. I love Stargate. I love Babylon 5. Battlestar is goddamn realistic as hell. Like it is near pick. I've never been on a Navy ship, but having been in the military as long as I was, you could go there and be like, oh, people are, they sing songs, they sing cadences, they have military burying and protocol and stuff. And sometimes, you just got to punch people. And that was like 4 seasons of melancholic sadness, right? Where they lose the big war, they lose the apocalypse war, and they just bolt and run for it, while the people that killed all their friends are chasing them. And in that, though, they deal with class, they deal with religion, they deal with, like, for example, you've got not some ships in the Battlestar Galactica fleet or the pleasure ships, Cloud 9, I think one of them's called. It's a vacation place. And some of them are mining vessels. Some of them process raw ore into things that the military can use. it's a real easy class distinction that they show in that. And one of the chief engineer, Chief Tyrrell for Battlestar Galactica, talks to Commander Adama and says, hey, the people on the mining ore ship are just as valuable as the people on Cloud 9, but their lives are infinitely worse. And you've got little kids growing up on the mining ship that will only know how to process the raw ore. So you're creating this class system already of lower class people who only live these menial lives. And it's you know, you're never going to have a completely equal and fair society, but boy, it's kind of nice if, you know, it's not so drastically unequal, right? Like, nothing's ever realistically going to be 100% equal. That's silly. But, you know, maybe you could have it be like 70-30 instead of like 95-5, you know, that's a more, you could shoot for that. But what are your thoughts on Battlestar? I'm assuming you've seen Battlestar, right? Like,
Actually, I have not, and I feel kind of
what
ashamed
the
of that.
fuck?
Yeah.
Are you serious?
I think you suggested to me to watch it back when we first met, like at IUPUI.
Like 5 years ago, I said
6 years ago it would have been, or something like that.
What? Have
It's
you
on
seen
my
Babylon
list. It's on my list for sure.
You
I've been waiting for like the right I don't know, circumstance. I don't know what you would call it, but I want to watch it. It's just that I missed it when it first came out because it was for me. It was that sort of thing where it was so hyped up that it could never live up to the hype in my mind. So
it came out in 2003. Of course you missed it. You were like 7 years old.
I was 9.
Okay.
I was watching Stargate at 7 years old.
Well, yeah, but that's pretty you know, family friendly. Okay, so you're not really up on Battlestar, but when you are, we'll talk.
Yo, for sure. I mean, but here, I'll tell you the one thing. When you told me, hey, be thinking about your 5 top like military sci-fi shows and movies, I made a list. And I put Battlestar Galactica on that list, even without having seen it, because even without having seen it, I recognize and I respect its importance. Because I've seen, from what I have from little clips that I've seen here and there, from like the analysis videos that talk about it or mention it. You know, there was a video I watched just, I think maybe earlier this week, maybe last week, something like that, where there's this guy on YouTube. His channel is called Space Doc, and he talks about like, have you ever seen him? He does like videos about sci-fi spaceships and series and all sorts of stuff like that. And he was talking about how to make good space combat. And one of his key examples for good space combat was I think the Battle of New Caprica or something like that. But it's the one where the 2 battle stars were going against the 4 base stars.
Oh, it's so good. I'm gonna spoil the fuck out of it. I don't even give a shit. It's okay. And I remember
I saw the clips of it on the show.
Oh, it's so good, Nick. How have you not seen this? Oh, it'll bring it to like stoic manly tears, because fucking okay, so end of season 2, the humans settle on what would be known as an M-class planet in Star Trek, where it's habitable, but like just barely. Like, it's kind of like, oh, we're going to live in Arizona, right? You can live in Arizona. You can grow.
That's an affront against God.
It's fucking Arizona. Like, and you can live there, but do you wanna? You know, I've been to Arizona. It's hot. And you've got people thinking, oh, the war is over. We found a planet that's surrounded by a nebula where the robots will never come find us. And so you got people disembarking, you got people, you know, separating from service and saying, oh, I get to maybe be a human again and see what being a person is like, instead of being constantly on the clock, ready for combat 24/7. And so the fleet kind of falls into disrepair because they're at half staff. You know, nobody wants to fight a war anymore. So
it's basically a metaphor for the peace of the 90s.
It's 90s.
The Soviet Union has collapsed, and now we're sizing down.
You haven't even seen it, and you fucking get it. And like at the end of the episode, the Cylons show up. They land their ground troops. They put a gun at the president's head and says, "Hey, this is our planet now, and you're our slaves." And he's like, "Cool." And then Commander Adama and the fleet see what happens, or like, we're out. And they bounce because they're like, "There's no way we can stop this. So we have to come back next season and find a way to get back." So what that guy is talking about is like the first 3 or 4 episodes of season 3 of Battlestar Galactica is where you have an insurgency by ex-soldiers on the ground in robot-occupied New Caprica, while the fleet outside of radar range is trying to figure out some sort of like plan to maybe get people back off the ground so they can hop on the road again. And there's this scene, and fuck it, I'll spoil it for you. It's been out for 20 years, and this is on you for not watching it.
I agree.
There's this scene where the robots are surrounding them, and Commander Dama's like, he goes, "Oh, we're dead. It's been an honor," right? Which is very distinct and important, because then all of a sudden the other Battlestar shows up, and then they get away, right? And that line, "It's been an honor," is important because if you watch like the J.J. Abrams Star Trek reboot, right? And Kirk at one point, when he thinks they're about to die, says, "I'm sorry." That's the worst possible thing you can say. And that's because "it's been an honor" means that we weren't wrong. We just lost. "I'm sorry," me being the captain who got you in this mess, means that I was wrong and you were wrong for following me. And so your lives have been squandered for no fucking reason. That line, those 2 lines always stuck out in my head. But god damn, dude, it's so good. And it's sad and it's tragic. And there's like collaborators, and there's a part where a guy collaborates with the occupiers, and then they bounce and they figure out, "Oh, you're one of the occupiers," and they blow his sobbing sorry ass out the airlock. He's begging for them to live, and they're like, "Go fuck yourself, get fucked," and they kick him out the airlock. It's so good. And there's another part where they were going to kill this other guy who they thought was a collaborator named Gata, and he was like secretary to the president. And then they realized, oh, he's the one that was feeding the resistance information. And so they figured, oh, we should stop murdering people out the airlock because we might not know everything. God damn it, Battlestar is so good. How the fuck have you not seen it, Nick? I could rant about this fucking amazing show all day. I feel like Dwight Schrute, the guy from The Office.
Yeah.
Oh,
never seen that either.
Like, are you from America? Like, what's wrong with you?
So many things. I don't watch a lot. There's a lot of TV I've missed because I only watch certain things.
There are toothless hillbillies in Alabama who have seen all of The Office twice. They can't read, but they can recite the whole series. What? Get on it. Anyway, what else is on your list, sir?
You mentioned a couple of them. Well, Stargate is definitely on there because I think after seeing Aliens, and again, Stargate may have come before Aliens. So again, it's kind of an amorphous.
No.
So I can't remember which one came. No, I know it didn't come before that in terms of chronology, but for me.
Oh, because
I know for a fact that I was watching Stargate while it was airing, like in season, I want to say 5 or 6, and that was like 2001. So
hey, let me pause right here because I gotta go pee.
Okay.
And yes, this is all staying in the episode.
No! No! I can't believe it. All of the toilet paper's gone.
Fuck.
You all right?
Yeah, I'm good. I have a cat, and right around this time, she always discovers, I don't know, whatever cat cocaine is, and runs. Sometimes she just runs circles in my house, and then sometimes I get in her way, and that's my fault for getting in the cat's way. But anyway,
Bronson gets the zoomies at night too.
yeah. Talk to me about your dog.
He's good. He's a little neurotic, but then again, he's a pit bull who is in the Humane Society for a year and a half. So I think neuroses comes with the territory.
Oh no! Well, I'm glad he's got a good person to love on him and take care of him.
My dad sits on the couch, right?
Sure.
And when my dad sits on the couch, Bronson has to have his head in his lap, and if not more. So it's a constant battle of, Bronson, I don't want you on me. You can be next to me, but don't be on me. That sort of thing.
I'm that way with my wife. Sometimes I just want to like hug on her when she's on the couch, and then because she's a school teacher, and she'll get home and she'll have had like 1,000 children like harass her all day, and then here comes her husband like, oh, I work from home, my wife's home, and then I just want to like cuddle with her on the couch because I miss her so much, because I'm basically her lost puppy, right?
Yeah. I get it. Why do you think I want to date? Because I'm sick of being emotional. I'm like touch starved, It's a simple equation. It's a simple equation, It's not like spoken about, because it's like because it's not something that men are supposed to admit to. But we want attention just as much as women. We just don't know how to process and often express that healthily all the time. I don't know if that's the right way to put it. But you know what I'm saying?
No, it is, and I will say this, because and fuck it, if you're cool with it, this will all stay in the episode, and we'll just go wherever the conversation. Sure. I will say this. I know. I don't want to say I know. I would not be surprised with, given your autism, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
and how you're kind of probably feel very much a stranger in a strange land around people quite a bit. So you're kind of like, oh, what does that mean? You're interpreting things, and you interpret the world just a hair differently than the rest of us, and that probably makes all the difference.
For me, I've got an analogy for it. Have you ever seen Men in Black 3?
Yes.
You remember the line with a guy who can see different, who's basically like or the alien who wears like the knit hat, the MacGuffin of the movie. Griffin, I think is his name. They ask, he's telling them about how he can see through time, like see different points in time, like he's unstuck in time, like friggin' Kurt Vonnegut story or something. And I think Will Smith, so that's Jay, starts to say, that sounds really cool. And Griffin says, it's an enormous pain in the ass. That's kind of how autism feels for me. Because on the one hand, it makes me very, very attuned to everything that everyone is doing at all times, always. Because I'm constantly trying to see, okay, what is this person's like perception of me? What is this person's perception of them? Because it's the side that people don't talk about. People assume that autism always means, oh, you don't have emotions, or you don't understand how to process emotions. Not necessarily. When you're a high functioning autistic person, it means that you may process them wrong, but you're hyper focused on them because you're trying to figure out stuff that you don't have the natural social understanding to get intuitively. So it's a double-edged sword, and it's a curse. Because
you have to teach yourself, if I understand this correctly, you have to teach yourself human interactions, human interpersonal relationships, things that come to a degree very naturally to kind of the baseline people, right?
again, there's another analogy for you. Going back to Star Trek. There's a big reason why Lieutenant Commander Data is such a touchstone for the autistic community, because a lot of autistic people see him as a good example for the sort of stuff they deal with, because he's trying to be human and he doesn't have a definition of what human is to start from. So he's basically trying to build his own understanding of human nature without having his own understanding of emotions that he can draw from intuitively. That's basically what it's like.
I kind of had a similar moment the other day. I was in a Chipotle, right? And I walked in, and as you do, and I walked in, I thought, oh, everyone's looking at me. They know I don't belong. You know? Then I'm like, wait a minute, no. They're not looking at you. No one thinks you don't belong except you, right? Because if you think, oh, everyone thinks this, no, it's you don't feel like you're assimilated to wherever you're at. And, you know, I mean, hell, going back to the veterans assimilating idea,
Yep.
You know, I've been back from Iraq since 2010. And I got out of the military in 2019, and the pandemic was kind of a deployment all, but it felt that it. Oh gosh, it was so familiar. You know, I remember when the pandemic kicked off, and I was like, "Oh, I did this already. Oh shit!" And
Going to deploy to your living room for about 2.5 years.
kind of like, you know, if you make a mistake, like you could die, but I get that though, where you kind of like Mandela in the Forever War, you're never quite feel like you fit in, and you're kind of like, oh, well, the words you say don't seem to jive with how everyone else is talking around you, right? Where you're like, or you'll say a thing, you'll think, oh, everyone will find this really funny, and then they don't.
Oh yes, that's happened to me more
opposite.
times than I can count, and it always sucks.
Oh man.
But I mean, you
Oh,
know, another. I keep coming up with these things, you know. So stop me if you need to. But it's
oh,
like, you
please
know,
do.
another good way to analogize it, you know, from the world of cinema or whatever, is it would be one of those moments in the movie where someone's like, you know, in an altered state, or maybe on the autism spectrum even, or whatever. But like there's a person like at a dinner or something, and they're like having their conversation or whatever, and they look up and they notice everyone else is out of focus. It's kind of like that. It's kind of
Yeah.
like it's kind of like living that moment, in an on and off all throughout your life. Because, you know, when I'm with people that I'm comfortable with, like obviously right now, if someone were to come into this room who wasn't like autism attuned and see the two of us talking, or if like we were talking face to face, they probably wouldn't be able to tell that I was autistic necessarily, because I'm comfortable. I mean,
Yeah.
if someone came in and was autism attuned, they could probably tell from some of my more fine mannerisms and things like that. They might be able to get a hint. Because one thing I've noticed about being an autistic person is it's like having a gaydar. You can notice other autistic people at the drop of a hat.
You
And
see who's kind of performing, I guess, for
yeah,
lack
well,
of
yes, exactly. I mean, you can tell who's performing, and even more so, it's kind of like that sense you get. You don't really see it anymore because of the way technology is now, but you probably remember like when you'd walk into a room where there's a cathode ray tube television on, but the picture isn't on, but you can tell that it's on because you can just sort of feel that weird electric hum that tells you, oh,
Yeah.
there's electronics running in here. It's kind of like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that, man. I
Like,
I
there's something off about this person. I don't know what it is, but oh yeah, they're on the spectrum.
yeah, being a veteran's kind of like that. You can kind of
Yep,
smell
I
it
can
on
imagine.
people. You're like, oh, you seem kind of sad. You're probably enlisted, right? Like, oh yeah, 20 years. Yeah, there it is. 3 ex-wives, 4 actually. No, it's a very, I get that.
And
And
that's
I
interesting because there's
remember,
a lot, because you know, I won't say there's overlap necessarily, but it's interesting you point that out, because again, that's a way in which the two communities, you know, veteran communities and like neurodivergent communities is the
yeah,
actual term for it, is have a lot of similarity because it's basically it's an altered way of experience that differentiates you from what we would consider normal or baseline. Because whether we're talking whether normal and baseline is civilian or whether it's neurotypical, that's something that is different from what I have been through, what you have been through, what other people in both of our camps have been through.
Probably neurotypical civilian.
Yeah.
Hold on. My cat has discovered a box full of paper. So I'm
No
gonna put you down for a second.
Sure, it's your thing.
Yeah. Are we done? You good? Okay. Anyway, I'm back.
You're fine.
For instance, I'm kind of a big guy, and I've got what I playfully call Capital Riot face, right? Because, big, stocky, angry looking, balding white dude, I fit a profile. I get it. It's so, my kind of like bored thinking face is, oh, he's pissed, and it's that, right? And I'll walk on the walking trail near my house, and I'll see people look at me kind of, so I'm very cognizant of how people see me, right? I'm very cognizant of making sure people have all of the space they could possibly want, right? I'm assuming I smell bad. If I'm walking on a trail and there's a single woman coming up, I kind of go all the way to the left, right? Yeah. Just because, so then they have all the space they could want, it's because I don't know how to just blend that way, I guess. So I kind of, there's a couple basic ideas like, oh, sometimes people seem intimidated by you for some reason. Like I've had people cross the street, right? Mm-hmm. And, and that's fine, right? I've crossed the street and people give me the heebie-jeebies too. That's, that's okay. It's okay. But, but then you go to the army, like I'd go to the National Guard, and I would know who I was, where I belonged, and where in the hierarchy I belonged.
Yeah.
And I kind of,
everything has its purpose and its station.
And I kind of had my own little special group of misfits I looked after, because I was never like Captain America by any means. But after a while, I had been in long enough that I knew what not to do, and I could find idiots that were very similar to myself and say, hey, you're an idiot, but that's okay. And this is what you're going to do. So you shouldn't do that for these 5 reasons. And these are all stories that happened to me. I think that's called, I rediscovered mentorship, I guess. That's what I'm describing. And then you go back to the civilian world, and it's, the National Guard's funny that way. It's very much, you've got one foot in both worlds, but you're never quite in either. And I'd love to see a military science fiction based around that. I guess I could write the damn thing, since I own Divided by Zero books. There's a brand that I've established that could do it. But no, I'm kind of more caught up in writing my memoirs right now, which, at the ripe old age of 35 just sounds kind of silly, but I had an exciting first half so far. Yeah. And let's be honest, I'm probably going to round this whole life out at about 70, right? I get it. It's fine. But anyway, I think we should end on my early death. So for the Derwin Lester Show, I'm Derwin.
I'm Nick Oakes. I'm always glad to be here. I'm your personal science writer, as we could say.
Senior NASA correspondent for the Derwin Lester Show. And we will see you next Monday morning at 0700 until I figure out how to stop recording.